Over the years, it's been pretty common for there to be a face attached to many of the products we buy. Some disappeared, and some have hung around for many years. But are these real people, or is the person you watch on TV and see in print ads just a made-up character? I became curious about this myself and decided to research this myself, so you don't have to. Check out the video to see what I found. In 1888, Chris Rutt and Charles Underwood bought a flour mill in St. Joseph, Missouri, a frontier town founded in the 1840s. The outlaw Jesse James lived there, so the flour mill wasn't the town's only claim to fame. The company was called the Pearl Milling Company and produced milled products using a pearl milling process. When they had excess flour, they put it in paper bags with the label Self-Rising Pancake Flour, which was later called the first ready mix. Rutt wasn't a cook, but a newspaper editor, and developed the Aunt Jemima pancake mix in his kitchen with a couple of other guys. Rutt heard a song called Old Aunt Jemima while attending a minstrel show. This was his inspiration for the Aunt Jemima name. In case you're wondering where the song Old Aunt Jemima came from, it was a folk song written in 1875 by Billy Kersons, an African-American comedian, folk singer, dancer, and minstrel performer. It became Kersons' most popular song and was performed by other minstrel shows. In 1889, Rutt appropriated the Aunt Jemima image from lithograph posters seen at a vaudeville house in St. Joseph, Missouri. These images are examples of a New York vaudeville house from 1900 and a lithograph from 1899. This may give you an idea of what these things looked like back then. I'm guessing the copyright laws weren't real strict back then either. Betcha Mr. Kersons didn't get a cut of any of this, but I digress. Rutt and Underwood didn't keep it for very long, as they were in need of cash. In 1890, they sold the recipe to the R.T. Davis Milling Company, which then began manufacturing the mix. Quaker Oats purchased the Aunt Jemima brand in 1926. Aunt Jemima became one of the longest continually running logos and trademarks in the history of American advertising, and the image was updated several times. The first image was an illustration by A.B. Frost in 1890 of Nancy Green, the first woman to rep the Aunt Jemima brand. Here is her illustration on a pancake box around 1923. The image that most of us old-timers are used to is an illustration by Haddon Sundblom. This one was modeled after Anna Robinson, another of the Aunt Jemima reps. Here's an advertisement that uses her likeness from 1951. And here is an updated, modernized image from 2014. But even updating her to a modern woman didn't help change the history of the racial stereotype of the brand. In June 2021, the Aunt Jemima brand was discontinued and became Pearl Milling Company. Take a look at this box of pancake mix that I have from 2023. Look close and you can see. New name, same great recipe, Aunt Jemima. So apparently, the brand hasn't completely been eliminated, just the image. Does that mean Aunt Jemima wasn't a real person? Well, the idea came from a lithograph, but there were real women that represented the brand over the years. I'll discuss a few of them here. The first Aunt Jemima rep was Nancy Green. Green was born into slavery on March 4, 1834, in Montgomery County, Kentucky. After the Civil War, she moved to Chicago, where she worked as a private nurse. Green was the first spokesperson hired by the R.T. Davis Milling Company for the Aunt Jemima pancake mix. Dressed as Aunt Jemima, Green appeared at the World's Columbian Exhibition in Chicago, where she operated a pancake cooking display. She appeared at fairs, festivals, flea markets, food shows, and local grocery stores. She was replaced by Agnes Moody for the 1900 Paris exhibition when Green refused to get on a boat to Paris. She died in 1923 at age 89 after being hit by a car and was buried in an unmarked pauper's grave at Oakwood Cemetery in Chicago, Illinois. Sherry Williams, president of the Bronzeville Historical Society in Chicago, wanted to get a grave marker for Green, but needed the consent of a relative. She found one of Green's descendants, Marcus Hayes, and got the go-ahead to proceed. After raising the money, a proper headstone was installed at her grave in September of 2020. Williams maintains the Find a Grave account for Nancy Green. I'll leave a link to the Find a Grave site so you can leave her some virtual flowers if you want. It doesn't cost anything to do this. Agnes Moody represented Aunt Jemima at the 1900 Paris Exposition. She was born into slavery in Hagerstown, Maryland, and at the age of 10 was among a group of slaves who was aided by the Underground Railroad to escape from their masters. Moody fled to Canada and returned to the United States in 1866 after the war, settling in Chicago. She was known in the Chicago area for her cornmeal, bread, and cakes. There was an article about her that ran in the Chicago Tribune in 1900 when she was getting ready to go to Paris. Describing her cooking, the piece stated, "In that line of endeavor, she is an artist." Moody died in 1903 in Chicago. Her obituary mistakenly identifies her as the original Aunt Jemima. One of the Aunt Jemima reps was from my home state of Texas. Her name was Lillian Richard, and she's buried in Hawkins, Texas. She was born in Hawkins in 1891 and died in 1956. She was the face of Aunt Jemima from 1925 to 1948. To be perfectly honest, I had no idea where Hawkins was, so I had to look it up. The population is 1,300, and it's located outside of Tyler, Texas. I know where that is. Hawkins is known as the pancake capital of the state, and it holds a pancake festival every year. I didn't know that either. I really need to get out more. I'll leave a link to the Find a Grave site where you can see her memorial. Anna Robinson answered an open audition and was hired to play Aunt Jemima at the 1933 Chicago World's Fair. Hers is the image that appeared on the Aunt Jemima box wearing the headscarf. Here is a picture of her holding boxes of the pancake mix with her photo. She worked for the company until her death in 1951. In all, there were 8 women who portrayed Aunt Jemima. The Aunt Jemima image has been controversial to say the least, because the image originated from a minstrel show lithograph. The song, Old Aunt Jemima, was performed by minstrel groups composed mostly of white people in blackface. Some minstrel groups, such as the people in this image from 1903, were made up of both white and black people. However, the lithograph advertising another AIG Field minstrel show was of a white man in blackface. I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that the Aunt Jemima brand has a few issues associated with it. In spite of updating the brand with an illustration of a modern woman, in 2020, Quaker Oats announced that it was pulling the plug on the image associated with the brand that many people found offensive. PepsiCo, the parent company of Quaker Oats, released the following statement. The pancake mix is now marketed under the name Pearl Milling Company and has an illustration of the old Davis Milling Company where the pancake mix first started. The original building was demolished in the 1970s. Surprisingly, some of the descendants of the women who represented Aunt Jemima aren't on board with this decision. Descendants of two of the Aunt Jemima reps, Lillian Richard and Anna Short Harrington, objected to the change. The image for Uncle Ben's rice was one of the most recognizable images in advertising. Uncle Ben's gave the Aunt Jemima logo a run for its money when it came to recognizability in advertising. The image on the box of Uncle Ben's was of an African American man in a bow tie. But was Uncle Ben a real guy, or just an illustration on a box drawn by an artist? In 2020, a spokesperson for Mars Food, the parent company for Uncle Ben, said, "We don't really know if real Ben ever existed. According to Mars, Uncle Ben was an African American rice grower known for the quality of his rice. George L. Harwell, an entrepreneur who had supplied rice to the armed forces in World War II, chose the name Uncle Ben's as a means to expand his marketing efforts to the general public." Then Caroline Sherman, another spokesperson for Mars, said that Frank Brown was the man whose image became the face of Uncle Ben's from 1946 to 2020. Supposedly, Brown was a maitre d' in a Chicago restaurant, and someone from Converted Rice, the original manufacturer of the rice, spotted him and used him for the image for Uncle Ben's. Not much else is known about him, according to Sherman, but she said there's an effort to learn more. "I don't have a lot of details about his past," she said, "but that's what we're hoping to gather as we go forward." So was the image of Uncle Ben's based on a real guy, or a made-up character for a logo? Your guess is as good as mine. Betty Crocker isn't a real person, but a fictional character. I don't think that surprises anyone. The character was originally created in 1921, following a contest in the Saturday Evening Post. Here is a portrait of Betty Crocker from a July 1925 advertisement in Ladies' Home Journal. In 1954, General Mills introduced the Red Spoon logo with her signature, placing it on gold medal flour, Bisquick, and cake mix packages. The name Betty was selected because it was viewed as an all-American name. Crocker was the last name of the Washburn Crosby Company director. Washburn Crosby would consolidate with other millers, and the company that we are now more familiar with, General Mills, was formed. Like Aunt Jemima, the character's image has been changed several times over the years, keeping up with fashion trends. In 1924, Betty got her first radio show, the country's first radio cooking program in Minneapolis, with various women playing Betty, or rather her voice. Probably one of the more popular Betty Crocker items was the Betty Crocker cookbook. I had one of these. However, now my cookbook of choice is End Your Carb Confusion, and that dude on the front of that cookbook looks nothing like Betty. When I was younger, I used to use Breck shampoo. It still exists, but there are no more Breck Girls, and Breck has lost considerable market share. When I was in my 20s, there was always the Breck Girl, that woman who had hair so luxurious that you were convinced that if you used Breck, it would look like that. It didn't. Breck Girls are real women. In 1936, Edward Breck, the son of the founder of the company, commissioned illustrator Charles Gates Sheldon for his ad campaign. The first illustrations were of ordinary women, as in this 1955 illustration. The Breck Girls were Breck family members, neighbors, or women in the community where Sheldon worked. Later on, Breck Girls were identified through the company's sponsorship of America's Junior Miss Contest, Women such as Sybil Shepherd in 1968, Cheryl Tiegs in 1968, Jacqueline Smith in 1971 and 1973, Kim Basinger in 1972 and 1974, and Brooke Shields in 1974. Since you've probably heard of all these women, the Breck campaign was obviously a good career move. The Breck Girl campaign was discontinued around 1978, when Breck shampoo started losing market share. Here is an interesting pair of Breck girls, Kim Basinger and her mom. The Smithsonian actually has a Breck Girls collection in the Natural Museum of American History. I'll leave a link in the description in this video. Wendy is an actual person, but her real name isn't Wendy, it's a nickname. Her real name is Melissa Thomas, and she's the fourth child of Dave Thomas, who founded Wendy's. I remember the first time I went to a Wendy's in San Antonio. I really got hooked on their Frosties. It wasn't a great diet food, to say the least. The original Wendy's was located downtown in Columbus, Ohio, which opened in 1969. It closed in 2007 due to a lack of business. Melissa's pictures were displayed on the wall of this store. Not only was the store named after her, but her likeness was used in the logo. But why use the name Wendy? After trying all 5 of his kids' names, he decided that Melissa's nickname, Wendy, came the closest to sounding like a wholesome, nostalgic place where families would take their kids for a meal. Thomas, being a former Kentucky Fried Chicken franchisee, knew the value of mascot and marketing. He had Melissa, who was 8 years old at the time, wear her hair in pigtails. She wore a blue and white striped dress that was made by her mom. He then took pictures of her. I had only seen pictures of Melissa as an adult and didn't think that she looked like the illustration of Wendy. While researching this, I came across a picture of her on the wall of the original Wendy's as an 8-year-old. She really does resemble her. This picture isn't in the public domain, so I can't use it in this video. I don't want to end up in Twitter jail. Wendy's Old-Fashioned Hamburgers was born. Afterwards, Dave Thomas regretted naming the restaurant after Melissa and posting her pictures, as it affected her privacy. She is now married and serves as the spokesperson for Wendy's. In 1984, Clara Peller was used in a Wendy's ad campaign. She was a real person too, and made the phrase, "Where's the beef?" a famous slogan. Peller, an 81-year-old immigrant from the former Soviet Union, wasn't an actress but a manicurist. She was hired as a temporary manicurist for a television commercial set. Peller was signed by a number of commercials before Wendy's picked her up because of her unusual voice and her straight-talking manner. Wendy's sales jumped 31% in 1985. Clara's line became so famous that vice presidential candidate Walter Mondale used it against Gary Hart in the 1984 presidential campaign. Peller died in 1987 in Chicago at the age of 85. She's buried in Waldheim Cemetery in Forest Park, Illinois. I'll link her Find a Grave account in the description of this video so you can leave her some virtual flowers if you want to. Ivory Snow detergent has been around a long time. Although the baby pictured on the box was a real baby, there were several Ivory Snow babies. After all, babies do grow out of their babyhood. One myth is that one of the Ivory Snow babies was Brooke Shields. Although Brooke was featured in Ivory Snow ads, she wasn't the baby on the box. One of the Ivory Snow babies that we know about because he fessed up to it was New York restaurant owner Drew Nearparent, who was a baby actor back in 1955. His mother was actress Sybil Trent. You may think, "Oh man, this is so boring." But even a 99 and 44 100% pure detergent like Ivory Snow can have people connected to it that have made some interesting career choices. Marilyn Chambers, The woman that is holding the baby on the early 1970s Ivory Snow box later became Marilyn Chambers' porn actress. It wouldn't have been so embarrassing for Ivory Snow if this was on the down low, but Miss Chambers went from being a porn actress to a pretty famous porn actress. One of her films, Behind the Green Door in 1972, premiered at the Cannes Film Festival and was well received. Perhaps Mick Jagger was mistaken when he said all publicity is good publicity. Chambers, proving that she was a woman before her time, instead of asking for a salary for her films, asked for 10% of the receipts and made $3 million in 2 years back in 1972 and 73. She wasn't so lucky in her personal life, battling drug and alcohol addiction as well as going through 3 marriages. She died in 2009 at the age of 56. Mr. Clean wasn't a real guy, but an illustration created by an advertising agency artist, drawn in 1957. According to Procter & Gamble, the original model for the image of Mr. Clean was a United States Navy sailor from Pensacola, Florida. The first actor to portray Mr. Clean on live television commercials was House Peters, Jr. He was an actor that was known for playing movie heavies. This is a 1948 photo of him from the movie Under California Stars, a Roy Rogers flick. Peters was Mr. Clean from the 1950s through the 1960s. He died of pneumonia in 2008 in Los Angeles at the age of 92. Although Mr. Clean is the strong, silent type, he did speak once in a few television commercials where actor Mark Dana appeared playing Mr. Clean in a suit and tie in the mid-1960s. Although I remember these marketing icons, I really had no clue about the story behind each one. To be perfectly honest, before I researched them, I thought most of them weren't real people. I hope you learned as much from watching this video as I did from making it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Are there any marketing icons that you remember? Let me know in the comments section.